Hi, welcome to Chat with Sonlight. Like Sonlight's curriculum offerings, we will explore homeschooling through the lens of a literature-based, Christ-centered education. Join us for everything you might be interested in for organizing your homeschool, connecting with others, and details on literature-based learning, and maybe a few sneak peeks. Hi, welcome to Chat with Sonlight. I am here today with Jessica Kaminski. She is, would you say, the author of the New Singapore Mathematics 2022?
So I'm one of the authors that worked on the 2022 Teachers Edition. So I was the US team that partnered with Singapore. Yeah.
So Sonlight, those of you who don't know, Sonlight is embracing the 2022 US edition on our website. And it is when you go to Singapore, this is what we will be offering. We still will have the old for those of you who are currently using it and don't want to make the change. But we think that this is an awesome update and we are looking forward to the changes that are coming with it. Jessica, can I get you to do a little intro of yourself? Tell us about you and your, whatever you want to tell us about your family and your experience in math.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I am from Tennessee. I'm a military kid. This is where I've lived the longest, so that's what I say I'm from. I'm the mom of three who I also homeschool, and I'm really excited on this journey that I've been. I was classroom teacher, and then I began a consulting kind of gig where I was training people in Singapore math, and was really fortunate. I worked for one of the big textbook companies at the time, and I got trained by people from the Ministry of Education in Singapore, got to learn so much that I did not know, and was fortunate to travel the country in all different types of school settings until I had my children. Once I had my children, I started homeschooling them. I still continued consulting on my own, and I started having all these really great conversations with my mom friends who were homeschooling their children saying, talk to me about this math. Like, I don't understand it. And I realized just like, school educators, home educators are also wanting to know, how does this work? How does this play out? And it really opened my eyes to how we are educators in a different sense, but still a much valued educator, and like having the best educational resources and materials available is equally as important. And so I've been really fortunate over the past couple of years to kind of have a foot in both worlds. I'm still working with teachers and schools all over the world, and then also getting to support homeschool families through authoring, training, all those types of things, but really getting to help kids all over the world embrace this type of mathematics.
Well, I know as a homeschool mom, we thank you for partnering with a big math curriculum and helping us, giving us that we call it the home instructor guide. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, as a homeschool mom, getting this great program and having a teacher's guide that's written for a classroom of 30 kids and trying to cram it in 40 minutes, it is written to us as a mom to teach our kids in the best way we can. So can you provide me an overview of Singapore math? Maybe give a background into Singapore math and how it evolved to be offered to us now?
Sure. I'll give you kind of the elevator speech of
Yes,
how it came to
30-second
be.
elevator or 10-second
There you
elevator.
go. So pretty much when you look at the history, it kind of takes back to the 1980s where Singapore students were not competing globally. And that matters because they're an island and they needed their students to have opportunities for jobs anywhere. And so what the Ministry of Education did was took their money for education, pulled it together, and just did a bunch of research. And they looked into education philosophy, all the theorists, all the things that we have shown to be really effective. And then they put them all together in a curriculum. So they didn't do anything new. It's nothing unique. It's nothing, particular to Singapore. It's just they took all the really great stuff and put it in one place in an order that makes sense.
Right.
So what ended up happening is when they did that, their students on the international tests, like the TEMS test or the PISA test, what happened was they saw that their students jumped, and they jumped dramatically, moving to the number one spot. So that kind of got everyone's attention, what happened, what changed. And what's been really interesting as they've revised this each year, the students have continued to stay within the top 3 spots. In fact, the PISA results just came out this month. And again, Singapore's right there at #1, and they've improved even more so based off of the modifications they've made to their syllabus. So the United States was interested, wanted to know what's going on, and there was an addition, primary mathematics. And there's been a couple of other ones, Math and Focus, those types of things that came from Marshall Cavendish, the Ministry of Education, and they've been adapted for US students. But it has all the same great teaching style. It's just, adapting the language, maybe the references, things like that. And then obviously creating teaching materials for the US educator, because in Singapore, all their teachers go to the same college. They all learn the same way. So they don't have a teacher's guide because this is their instruction. It's a smaller country and that's possible. Whereas in the US, we all have lots of different ways that we come about our own math experience and our own education. So what we've seen is we've had the original US edition. Then there were some adaptations based on particular states and standards and those types of things. And now we have the newest edition. This primary mathematics has the original Singaporean authors that worked on the original. It's just modified for the 21st century student, because the students we had 10 plus years ago with that old edition are not the same students that we have now, and the jobs that we have and all the types of situations that our students are having. And so Singapore really put a lot of time into their latest syllabus to reflect what our students are going to need in the workforce moving forward. And so they just felt like a new edition would really, and in all honesty, if you could compare it, it needed an update. It was kind of old and it needed an update, and it's just continues to evolve as how we learn about students and how we learn about how they do mathematics evolves. And again, that research is just so solid to help our students be successful in math.
So do you think that the 2022, you said you updated the terms, it's more modern. Is it a lot different from the previous version or just subtle differences?
I think, well, first of all, if you set them side by side, you're going to go, whoa, this is really different, because it does look really different. It used to be a thin little book. This is a thicker book. Pictures look really different, that type of thing. So I think it is a pretty big change. What I personally like from it is the ease of use, in my opinion, is so much better. So every day follows a similar pattern. So your students know this is how we open a lesson. This is how the lesson's going to end. It follows that similar pattern. There's workspace in the book, so everything can happen in that student book. And then again, there are some topic changes. One of the big pushes in Singapore's newest syllabus was that we are not going to accelerate by providing concepts earlier. So we used to have this mindset that, well, if I introduce it to them earlier, they're going to be, that we're going to accelerate their learning. And instead of introducing that topic earlier, we're going to take another topic and we're going to go more in depth. So we're calling it enrichment. There's more of this enrichment, more of this depth. And so what you will find is where there may have been a random chapter that was like, oh, we're just going to talk about, this skill and just give them that exposure. They've actually moved some of those or embedded them where they're really subtle, like fractions is now might be in shapes, because you're going to divide shapes and talk about shapes, in the sense that we want our students to go deeper. And so when you are comparing the table of contents and you might say, well, I don't see this. Why is that not in this grade level anymore? Again, when you compare them, it's about going deeper into the concept and really stretching it and really ensuring that our students understand it, as opposed to just giving them this like quick little intro that they may or may not remember. And then they go on to the next year and they need that information again. So I would say there are quite a few differences. Especially if you have used the old edition and you're comparing them. From everyone that I've met who's just started with the new edition, they've said it's been really easy to pick up and to go, because it does. We tried really hard on the American team, especially with the homeschool guides. We were all homeschool parents. And so we said, here's what we need. Let's tell you from our vantage point. Let's be really sure that we include these components, because we understand what it's like to be teaching multiple subjects and multiple children, and how can we make this easy for everyone to use.
And I've read through some of the home instructor guides, and it is very clear. And I've been very impressed as a mom. Obviously, my listeners know my kids have graduated and moved on, so I'm not in that trench right now. I will be probably advising a grandchild or my child as the grandkids come along. So I am very eager to always learn all the different ways. But I've been reading through the home instructor guides, getting things ready for Sonlight to present it and give it and be able to answer questions. And I have been just the ease of, oh, you'll need these. It's all laid out, the manipulatives of what you would need for this unit. And, you'll want to do this practice. And here's a way to, here's an extra way to teach the same concept. We gave you one example. Here's a secondary one to teach it. Very nice. Let me ask you, you were talking about, there are some subtle changes. One, I noticed like just down in the beginning levels used to be, I'm trying to remember what it was time that we taught in the very beginning, like at the kindergarten level or first grade. And now it's just shifted. I'm good with that time was not taught yet, but do you think it's going to be hard for a family maybe that has used the older version if they wanted to switch to the newer version? Is that going to be a seamless switch for them, or do they need to is there any flags they need to watch for?
That's a really good question. Some of those things, and kindergarten's a tricky one because first of all, there's no Singapore kindergarten.
Right.
They don't start school, much like many other countries, they don't start school until first grade, like age 6. So our kindergarten program was written completely by U.S. educators, Kim Mickle and Beth Ardell, who are amazing. They trained me when I first started, and I love listening to them. And so anything in that kindergarten curriculum is really about just creating a strong foundation of a student and a child who loves learning and loves mathematics and just getting in there. So kindergarten's always like a tricky little beast to kind of tackle. As many of us know, I have a kindergartner right now. And, they just come in all different ways. Some are super eager, some are not. And so you just kind of have to go at their own pace. So there is always that to consider. When you're thinking of the transition, of course, as you get higher in the grade levels, it is more challenging to transition. The K through 2 transition is pretty seamless. When you start hitting 3rd through 6th grade, there are some things just to note. But one of the great things about the new edition is they built in things to help you transition, including every chapter starts with this part called recall.
Mm-hmm.
And in the recall, it's review. So you are literally reviewing what you're hoping they remember. And even if you were doing primary mathematics 2022, we still do the review because most of the time our students need just a little refresher. And so you're going to do that before every chapter. And then what's really cool is you get online access. And if they struggle with one of those questions, you have online access to a transition guide that you can say, okay, wow, we did not understand number 3. And you can click on it and it will give you a resource from that grade level that you may not have purchased, but it gives it to you for free. And you can do a review with your student. So I always tell people when you're thinking about the transition, just remember that you have those resources available to you and you want to make sure that you know how to access them and get on there because you may need to do a lesson or so. What I'm hearing from a lot of people is that because this book goes more in depth, it actually has been okay as a transition because you're going deeper into that review and those types of things. So most people are finding that, but I will say, if you're jumping in 5th and 6th grade, it is a little bit more, challenging just because the content can shift quite a bit.
So I know in the 2022, you also have built in assessment test in a separate book that can be purchased. It's not required to do it as a home instructor, but obviously encouraged. Are there additional, and then there's the recall at the beginning of the chapter. Are there additional assessment tools besides the test? And, obviously I started, I'm going to recall, I'm going to find out if my student knows it. We're going to practice what they don't know before they get going. And then at the end of that, I guess sections, because it's not every chapter has a test. for every level and not every assessment, but there's quarterly, is it not? Generally,
Yeah.
generally, don't quote us.
It's a little bit different. Kindergarten, again, kindergarten's own beast.
Yeah.
They do not have an assessment for every single chapter in like a test, but there is something called a performance task for every single chapter. And
Right.
that's in the student book. So that's included. And in the student book, it's basically like a real life. Can you apply this? Can you make sense of how to use what you just learned in that chapter? So that's a great assessment. And it comes with a rubric, which my kid loves because he loves to check off and get the smiley faces and say, where he's at. So that's one way. In grades 1 through 6, we do have a chapter practice in the student book as well,
Mhm.
which is kind of like an assessment. It's more like a quiz, in my opinion, because they're very straightforward questions. And even in the home instructor's guide or the teacher's guide, it'll tell you like this question came from this lesson and like this is the level of question, like how challenging it is. And then you can get the assessment guide. Now, the assessment guide is designed to be more of like a cumulative assessment that's going to show can they apply skills. So you're going to see that those questions are more challenging. One question might include 3 different skills. And they do have those for kindergarten. They're like every couple of chapters because the way the kindergarten chapters are. In the other grade levels, it's every single chapter. And then they do have some cumulative, they have mid-year, end of the year. So you can have as many assessments as you want with that guide, which again, I know every state has different requirements. So I tell people, it may be a valuable resource to you, or it may be something that you feel like the student book gives you enough. Totally depends on your situation. But you definitely have real life situations and then paper pencil options too.
I always liked to give my kids some sort of test, concrete test. Even I've lived in states that didn't require it. I have some that do, but I had parents that looked over my shoulder, like my parents. So I liked to have something to say, well, look, they're doing fine. Yes, they're outside in the yard playing right now, and we're calling it school at the moment, but they're making progress and they're doing fine. Just shift a little bit. As a mom, you who helped write this and put this together, what is your favorite part of the updates to 2022 besides maybe colored textbooks for the kids?
Better pictures. So that's a good question because I also worked on the other book that's mainly sold to schools and, that type of thing. And I've taught from the old edition. I've taught in a classroom from other editions. Like I've taught so many of them. And I will say my 3 children use this edition because it's so easy to pick up and go. Now, granted, I have a strong math background and I know that. So, I am keeping that. But I have 3 really different children. I have one who's pretty gifted. I have one who has some learning challenges. And then, like I said, my kindergartner, we're still figuring her learning style out. But one of the things I really like about this is it works for everybody. Because of the depth of questions, my gifted child can go where he wants to go. And we can ask these really tough questions and we can do those kind of things. My child who has some learning, challenges, we can tear the pages out. And because there's only a few problems that you go in depth, it looks manageable to him. Like he sits down and he's like, okay, we're gonna do 4 problems. I can handle 4 problems. And one of the things that's really great is every problem builds upon itself. So he's able to like keep working. And if he hits his frustration, we take a break, we come back and we go back in. So he's not doing 50 of the same type of problem. He's doing one and it's building and building and building. And it's really, really great to see that. I also think the way that the lesson follows the same pattern every single day, that we start with this open, like use manipulatives, talk it through, and then we work on the problems and then we move to independence. They know exactly what their math block looks like. They know when they come to sit down with me, we're going to start here. This is where we're going to end. And
Right.
so they know that. So I really enjoyed that because it works for everybody and we're all kind of following that same pattern. And it's just kind of taken some of the frustration out. I mean, shopping for homeschool curriculum can be so challenging, especially when you have different children and trying to meet their needs and all that kind of stuff. And I really like that this works for everybody and that they're experiencing success. And I'm seeing even, you know, even a child who really, really struggles be able to look for patterns and say, hey, I noticed this and I'm wondering about this. And it's just so fun to watch and embrace. And so I would say for me, that's been one of the best things about the new edition. Because when we had the old edition, you'd open that book with all the words on it. You know, it would my one child would be like, nope, too much, can't do it, not doing it. And so we'd have to write it out on a whiteboard just to give him the space. But with this, we're able to open it. He likes the color, he likes the pictures, he's able to attack it. And then I think it makes, you have all those challenging problems in there too that really push to that highest level, which is nice embedded in one lesson.
So do you think that there will be any updates? Like, are there planned? Let me rephrase that question. I just had it in front of me. Anyway, so are there plans for future updates from this already? Like, you already know, like, this was great and we're going to expand on this product, or anything like that that we know of coming down?
I personally don't know anything, although I'm not privy to all those conversations, but nothing has been said to me. I know we are trying to request a 7-8. That has been one that we're like, can we please get a 7-8? And I know that was on the agenda before COVID. When we were originally starting the project, it was to go all the way. And then, COVID changed so many things about what we had time to do. And so I'm hoping that that gets on the agenda again as a project. But in terms of a newer edition, I think this will probably be the one that sticks around for a while. Hopefully, and unless, standards change again or, something like that, I think this would be the one.
Well, I was really trying to hedge towards that 7-8 without saying, are you going to go past? Because I work on the convention floor and I get asked that question. Well, so it only goes here? We're like, yes. Well, what do you do after that? Well, they don't have an option right now. So,
Right,
not,
right.
but it's okay. We're going to just hope that Singapore moves forward and gives that 7 and 8 like we all want.
Yes.
So, I had one more question, probably more than that. So I know a lot of people, you said the ministry standards, the standards, and some people get very scared when they hear meeting the standards and they don't hear standards, they hear Common Core. And I'm going to come back to you. You said you grew up military kid. I did too. And I'm going to quickly jump in and say, I welcome standards because I moved all over the country and we would go from one state to the next state and the standards weren't there back when I was a kid, and you're younger than I am. And it was a hinder as a kid who grew and moved around. Obviously, we're talking about homeschool moms, but there is always that question, will my kid have to ever go into the school system?
Mhm.
Are they going to be ready to jump into the system if ever needed? If God changed my life and had to put them in school, would they be there? Can we talk what the difference between a standard and what Common Core is? So,
Yeah, I definitely think I had a very similar experience. I moved in the middle of high school from Texas to Georgia. And because the standards in each state were really different, they didn't know where to put me when I came into Georgia. And I couldn't go into the honors classes because of the year I transferred in. And so they just put me in the next grade level. And we're like, here, take this grade level science and this grade level English. And, and I ended up having some remediation of like taking a class again because they literally did not know what to do. So, other countries that are smaller have, a country-based kind of just here's what you're going to learn in each grade level because that's just the way it is. We have such a large country and we have state governments and, all those kind of things. So it makes it a little trickier when thinking about that. So when you just hear a standard, I kind of look at it as like a benchmark. What are you hoping that in this grade level, this is what we're going to do? And what's unique about Singapore's standards is they use research-based, again, and this comes mainly from like Jerome Bruner and understanding that we need to spiral concepts and not just spiral them like you see them again, but the spiral gets more in depth. So we want to ensure that we're laying a strong foundation in the early grade levels so that when we come back to it in another grade level, we're building off of that knowledge. So that's why those objectives are really important, because if we just do it, this 1 year, well, then what happens if you don't get all of it? Or what happens if you weren't ready or you were sick a bunch or, any of those types of things, and you miss that foundational piece. And so what you'll find in the standards is there is this level of a hierarchy where, okay, it's introduced at this level. And then in this grade level, you're going to use that knowledge to apply it in this way or something like that. A great example of this is like learning to add and subtract. You learn the meaning of addition and subtraction in kindergarten. You learn your math facts in first grade and you start trying to apply them to more complicated situations. And then you start learning how to add with regrouping and what is that? And, all that kind of stuff. Then you hit second grade and you start doing multi-digit numbers. So all of that builds upon itself instead of learning it all at one time, because we know that would take so long if we learned it all at one time. And if you're like my children, you would check out after a while because it's too much. So when you hear those objectives or those standards, it's really just the benchmark for each grade level for us to say, okay, here's what we're all agreeing upon is going to be an objective for this grade level. And it helps us just to stay on the same page. And I think that's really important. When you hear Common Core, that was more of an initiative for schools to help schools be accountable and to do all those kind of things. Because I was in the classroom when that was happening and it came into our teacher evaluations. It came in, it was more of an initiative for schools and accountability and that kind of thing. And, and it got twisted into whatever. But when we just talk about, so Singapore has a syllabus and their syllabus is what they find, okay, here's what we're expecting. And then the US has its own version of standards, and every state kind of goes and they tweak them a little bit based on their state and maybe something they want to add in there. So for primary math 2022, Singapore just tried to meet what is generally taught in the US in those grade levels. And in fact, you can say, I'm in the state of California. How does this align to what the state of California says? If you have, we're considering maybe you're going to go into middle school or in high school or something like that. So it's typically just what is typically taught in those grade levels. And so nothing to be, super worried about, but more of just a way to check, here's what we want our first graders to know. Here's what we want our second graders to know. And it's also really helpful, again, when you're looking at that assessment or you're trying to consider if they're ready for this concept or anything like that, because if we didn't have those, we just start anywhere. And I think it just helps us all to kind of just stay on track and to follow those things. And not so much as like a gotcha or, your student's not ready, but more just helping you to just stay in that same rhythm of what's expected in each grade level.
It's kind of like it is the end goal for us every year. Our kid needs to learn this, whatever their standard is.
Yeah.
And I'm all in on that one. I always need a goal to get to. And otherwise I'm just teaching and we might take too many days off or I get too far ahead, and sometimes too far ahead is not good either. So,
right.
Speaking of that, just kind of you triggered, and I forgot to ask you, you have placement tests to come into 2022's Singapore. And we will have links to those with all of our products so that if you are new to Singapore, you definitely want to take a placement test to know where you're going to land, because Singapore is not the same as Joe Schmo math that we've used before. Or I would say as a kindergarten, you don't need to take a placement test. They're coming in not knowing anything. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah.
But would you suggest any placements if I use the old Singapore and I'm like, I went from 3B, which I have another question there, and I know I'm going to 4A. Would you suggest doing the placement test just to confirm that 4A is my next step? for 2022? Like if I'm going from the old to the
And
new.
yeah, I think you can. So all the placement test is, and I didn't know this until someone pointed it out, but all the placement tests are the recalls. So the sections at the beginning of the chapter. So for example, if I were going to take the fourth grade placement test, if my child does really well on that, that means we're good for this book because it's testing the skills prior.
Okay.
So you just got to kind of think about that. It's almost like you keep going until you hit frustration. So then, if I were like, well, let's just try the fifth grade one, and I try the fifth grade one, and my child's like, I've never seen any of this. Well, that's because that's the fourth grade content.
Right.
So when you're looking at those placement tests, it's really assessing that they have the skills necessary for that particular book. I know previously my understanding of placement was like, okay, this is what's in the book, and that's kind of not the same mindset. So just keeping that in mind. When you're switching from addition to addition, I would say in the K2, it's probably pretty seamless. Like I wouldn't stress too much about that. Again, when you hit the 3, 4, 5, there is a little bit of that. And also it's just because there's so much number sense in those grade levels that you may have felt like, "Woo, we did great in this book." But then as you start to break it down, you realize, oh man, we had some struggles through multiplication, division, or, we were really pushing through this and we might need to spend a little more time there. So that placement test could be helpful for that.
And absolutely, you want to spend that time. I know moms like to check our boxes. We finished that. Let's move on. I want to show that you're doing great, child. But if you spend the extra 4 or 5 months reviewing a concept from the previous year, it is a world of difference come by the time they're hitting high school. I mean, and that's 4 months spent here is worth 2 years probably of high school frustration. So my words of advice to moms, trust that process. If you need to go back, go back. It is not a failure. You are providing your child with such great success. One more thing. I know that Singapore has books A and B.
Mhm.
Why? Why?
Well, I don't
I
know
mean,
where
there's
there's
a
going to
rhyme and a
be.
reason, I'm sure. I'm just
Yeah, they're probably just to break it up, so you don't have such a large book. Here's kind of what to know about the A and the B books. So kindergarten, the A book actually will probably go faster because it's like learning numbers 1 through 10. And if your child has had any experience with counting, it may go faster. But then you hit that B book in kindergarten and you're going to sit there for a little bit because the first chapter in the B book is about being able to break numbers apart and really spend time there. And so for me, we actually flew through the A book and we hit B book and we slowed down dramatically to give my daughter more time to really love numbers and understand numbers. And I wanted her to feel confident moving forward. That's completely the opposite for the other grade levels. In the other grade levels, you'll notice your A book is bigger than the B book because it's all the number sense. So all the operations, all the number sense takes place in the A book, and in the B book is all the application of those skills.
okay.
So, for example, we're working through second grade right now. So we spent 3 chapters on addition, subtraction, and then word problems with addition and subtraction. And now we head into our B book and it's measurement. And there's going to be application of that addition and subtraction. And then we're going to hit some other, time and things like that because of that upward spiral. So I tell people don't stress, it's December and you're still in the A book. That's okay because that book is meaty. My fourth grader is not done with the A book and he won't be done probably for another couple of months because that A book is meaty. The B book is almost like a refresher because you're applying those skills. And in fact, what you'll find through that B book is you may have to do some review while you're going through that because, oh, wow, we did long division 3 months ago, and now you need to do it to solve this problem. Let's take a moment to review that and go slow. So you'll find that the skills are kind of broken apart by that. And the B book will go much faster if you take your time through that A book and then go at the pace there. So yeah. So I don't know why they decided to put them in 2 separate books, but that's just how they're organized. And just keeping in mind that, some people are like, oh, this is first half of the year and second half of the year, and that's not typically how it works out.
No, from what I've already looked through, no, I mean, they're not equally in chapters. Some have like 6 and 7 chapters, and then this one had 4. So yeah, they are not equal. But that explains a lot to me. I was like, one's your meat and one's applying everything you learned. It's wrap it up here. We have our homeschool moms, homeschool families listening, dads too. Do you have advice that you would like to just bestow that you wish you could give to a homeschool family?
Yeah, I would just say, remember this is about teaching your child to think, right? Like you want your child to be able to go off in the world and solve problems and be able to think. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that math is like this list of things that we have to learn and we have to check off. And I really love in Singapore, they talk about that it's about creating a thinker, somebody who's logical, who perseveres, who can problem solve. And that is my intent. This is just a vehicle to get you there. And so when you're starting to go through these and you hit those really hard problems and you want to be like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. We don't want to tackle this, or we're not going to do that. Think about it more as like a puzzle. And if you approach it from, hey, this is hard. This is a hard problem. Let's see what we can do to figure it out. You're really encouraging your child to become this world changer who can push through and solve more complicated things. And I just try to remind people, like, come at it from that. Because yeah, there are going to be days where it's really easy. And then there's going to be days where you're struggling through that problem and you're going, why did we choose this? This is so hard. But it's worth it in the long run. Like I said, when my son came up to me and he was like, Mom, I know how to add 9 and 9 by thinking about 10 and 10. I was like, oh my gosh, that's cool. And he started walking me through it. And he was talking about something in the car, and relating it to his math facts. That's where it comes into play. And just remembering you have all those resources, you have all that support, and just kind of take a moment to look at the big picture and remember that you're creating a lifelong thinker who perseveres and can problem solve.
There you go. That is an excellent word. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you being with us today. I look forward to where Singapore 2022 goes for us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am also attending some of the homeschool conventions too for Marshall Cavendish and would be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Well, when we get off screen, you and I will have to compare notes to see where we'll be at the same place.
Yeah, I would love that. Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Do you have an idea for a podcast topic, or do you want to chat with Sonlight on an upcoming episode? Email us at connections@sonlight.com.